I just got railed by 583 guys in 6 hours. I was aiming for 200. So I was so shocked when so many people rocked up. That was honestly the best day of my life.
Why would a woman do that? I'll show you.
So I just finished up with my client. This is how much money I made doing FS. I was with him for 1 hour and that is enough. Like, I am so drained. He was just one of those clients that wanted to make the most out of the booking. Super annoying. I really don't like those clients. Let's see how much money I made. So 2,200, and then he did pay 300 deposit. So 2,500 for 1 hour's work.
World's oldest profession. It's about the money. If you go onto TikTok, you'll see that there is a whole genre of videos normalizing this. Women's empowerment. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And the comment section is the usual spectrum of, oh my God, so disgusting. You go girl, get that bag. But one of the most interesting reactions I've seen to this kind of content is men saying, this is the end of civilization. This will cause societal collapse. The West is falling. And I find that really interesting. I've seen it over and over again in my own comment section. Men saying that there is a link between female promiscuity and degeneracy and the end of civilization, like they can just feel it at a gut level. And you know what? There might actually be something to it. Have you ever heard of the book Sex and Culture by J.D. Unwin? He was a British anthropologist and he did a sweeping cross-cultural analysis of 86 different civilizations because he wanted to find out if there was a link between culturally enforced sexual restraint for women and that culture thriving. And the answer is yes. Without exception, cultures that regulated female sexuality thrived and those that didn't failed. I only learned about this book by reading a blog post. The post had really interesting data and graphs. I'm going to be sharing them in this video, but full credit to the author. I'm going to link to his post down below if you want to read it for yourself. But what he did is he took Unwin's work, which was published in the 1930s, decades before the sexual revolution in the West. He took Unwin's theory of civilizational collapse and he applies it to the modern era. And the data makes a devastating case. The short version being that the reason that the West is in decline is because female sexuality is out of control. Sounds far-fetched? Well, watch the video. Tell me what you think at the end. Now, it's important to know that Unwin himself was in favor of regulating the sexual expression of both men and women. He would probably criticize both this woman and the 583 guys who slept with her. But putting his personal discernment aside, his findings demonstrated that it was the strict regulation of female sexuality that indicated whether or not society took sexual discipline as a whole seriously. And it's pretty obvious that in the modern age, the West does not.
The sluttiest thing I've ever done. I this one guy one night and then his best friend the other night. Bye!
Okay, let's explain Unwin's basic theory. Here it is. Humans possess finite social and creative energy. It's not unlimited. Now, in a sexually liberated environment, all of that energy gets channeled into sexual exploration and indulgence. And while it might be personally gratifying to that individual, it ultimately doesn't lead the culture anywhere. By contrast, in a sexually restrained society, all of that creative social energy, that gets channeled into productive endeavors. Invention, art, governance, exploration. It's like the culture-wide application of the NoFap movement. Guys who say that not pleasuring themselves makes them more productive. But why? How does this work? What specifically is the link between sexual restraint and a productive society? Why does civilization collapse without that restraint? And is that what we're going through? I want to start by using evidence from the West that demonstrates why granting sexual freedom to women does lead to cultural collapse. First of all, there is going to be a lack of long-term investment from men. Second, the unfolding of selection theory. And third, the feminization of that culture. If civilization is collapsing, you need to make smart choices. You need to make sure that you're safe, not just from manipulative women, but also with regards to your online activity. There are scammers out there every single day trying to trick you and steal your personal information. And with advances in AI technology, their tactics aren't just multiplying, they're getting smarter, more sophisticated. It's not just emails anymore, it's texts, it's links. You start to get the feeling like anything you click on could put you at risk. In today's world, you can't afford to leave yourself exposed, and that's why I use the sponsor of today's video, Aura. Did you know that with just a simple Google search of your name and email address, that can reveal that data brokers are already selling your personal data? These companies collect your information and then flip it to scammers without your consent. Legally, data brokers are supposed to remove your information if you request it, but of course, they make the process very complicated on purpose. This is why Aura is so vital, because it automatically scrubs your data from these shady sites, and it works to keep them off for good. But Aura is more than just data removal. It is full spectrum digital security. It gives you real-time fraud alerts, dark web monitoring, VPN, antivirus, password manager, and if the worst does happen, you've got $5 million in ID theft insurance, plus 24/7 access to US-based fraud experts. I refuse to leave myself vulnerable, and so should you. And the good news is that you can try Aura for 14 days completely free. Just go to aura.com/Alexander Grace. That's enough time for Aura to show you exactly where your data is being leaked and sold. So click on the link in the description box below and protect yourself today. Okay, back to the video. Why is there this link between the lack of female sexual restraint and the collapse of a civilization? First reason, there is a lack of long-term investment from men. Understand that paternity tests with DNA are a very recent invention. The ancient way of guaranteeing paternity certainty was to just keep a really close eye on your woman. The cultures would very strictly police female sexuality, making sure they're virgins on their wedding night, that they don't spend alone time with other men, that a marriage is only considered legitimate if it has been consummated. Seriously, if you look at anthropological records, you'll see that tribes and cultures across the world have very strictly policed female sexual expression. And I'm not saying that that's not problematic. Often completely innocent women's freedoms were hugely controlled and restricted out of, paranoia. And you can blame and shame, cavemen for doing that if you want. But I think the lesson from that is that we need to take the need for paternity certainty very seriously. You can't just ignore it and then shame men away. That's not going to work, because what they are trying to achieve is to make sure that men can be confident that the children that their female partner produce are his. That is extremely important, because it makes that man think about his descendants, makes him think about his legacy and want to leave something behind for his family to enjoy. It also makes him invested in the society because he wants his children to grow up in a functioning culture. My daughter is almost 5, and since she was born, this has definitely been the busiest period of my life. Raising children isn't necessarily easy, but at the same time, it's been the most productive era of my life ever. My focus is very long-term now. I think frequently about grandchildren and what I want to leave them when I'm gone. When you have children and you know that they're yours, your decision-making, your focus, your priorities, they're very different. And it brings out the best in men. The research shows that married men who have children, they significantly out-earn their peers with the same qualifications but who don't have children. You would think that not having children is a smart financial move, and yet the statistics show that having children, those men, they end up with more money at retirement. It is really important for a culture that the men are thinking long-term. It brings out the best in them. If you live in a society with sexual promiscuity and there's very little faith that the children born are going to be the biological children of the man who thinks that he's the father, then he stops thinking in a long-term way. His mind starts to focus more on short-term pleasures and random hookups. Marriage and children are proven stable building blocks that enable long-term thinking. And sadly, both of them have been in decline since the sexual liberation movement. Look at this graph and look at how the median age of marriage has just shot up in the recent decades. It used to be that in your early and mid-20s, you think, okay, I'm a fully grown adult now. I've got to start making responsible choices. I've got to start thinking about my future, planning for the long term. But in the modern age, it's like we've added an extra 10 years on to childhood, and people don't start to think that seriously until they're in their 30s. As well as having implications on that person's personal life, it's also just not good for the culture for people to have essentially 10 years where they're less productive. There's also a growing number of people who just never get married married. Look at the number of people getting married. Look how the numbers just go down and down and down. It's not good. If you want men to invest in the future and think long term, you need to give them something tangible and solid to invest in. You need to incentivize them to care, to have a stake in it. I don't care what feminists are trying to brand it off as now, just like men's paranoia or insecurity. I don't care. The fact is, paternity certainty is essential. I've been saying this on the channel for years. We need to have mandatory paternity tests done at birth. You do that and it will make a huge difference. The second reason I want to talk about is selection theory. Now, in a society with a lot of sexual restraint, you're going to find that women are long-term in their thinking. They know they want a man who's going to be stable, kind, and reliable because he's going to be the father of her children. He might be a bit more boring and less exciting, but he's solid and dependable. In a society with sexual freedom and no restraint, women are obviously going to be more short-term in their thinking and just chasing the kind of sexual gratification that comes from, hookups with hot bad boys. They're not thinking about whether or not he comes from a good family, whether or not he's kind and loyal. No, is he exciting? Does he have big muscles? Has he got a big Instagram following? The black pill guys who say that women focus on looks way more than we've thought, they're not crazy. I don't think it's always been this way that women were so looks focused, but certainly in recent decades, it's become so much more important to women how a man looks. Because if all you're looking for is some short-term gratification with a random hookup, that's what's important. Is he hot? And so with social media and like the dating apps that you swipe, looks have just gotten more and more important. But a man's appearance, that doesn't speak to how good of a partner he's going to be in the long term. That's not going to do anything for a productive society. We're focusing on the wrong things. And it didn't used to be that way. Way back in the day, if you wanted to marry a woman, you didn't even need to convince her. You needed to convince her dad. And obviously you're not going to be like strutting about and posing and like showing the dad how good looking you are. No, the qualities that you're going to emphasize: I am reliable, I can provide, I can protect, I will treat your daughter well. This is what dad is looking for. He doesn't care if you're ugly. The focus away from the long term to the short term has meant that it's a lot easier for narcissists to get their foot in the door. If the community and your parents are scrutinizing a man for marriage, it's going to be a pretty intense process. It's going to be hard to fool everybody. But if all that's happening is that you've got to convince her when she's out at the club and she's a bit inebriated that you're a charming guy who can give her a good time, that's way easier for him to sleaze his way into her life, which of course gives her bad experiences with men, which makes her bitter and less enthusiastic about dating. And of course, because of her sexual history, fewer and fewer men want to commit to her out of fear of this paternity certainty. So you have the predictable consequence that the marriage rates continue to drop. This graph is terrifying. Look, this starts at 1990. This is not a huge span of time, but look at the number falling. We do not want a society where a few narcissistic men are fathering children all over town. That's not good for children. Children need to know their fathers. The statistics on children who are born without a dad in the home are devastating, far more likely to drop out of high school, to start committing crimes. For children to thrive, they need stability and predictability. Marriage provides that. And if women choose for long-term partnership traits, it also provides them with a solid role model of actual masculinity. What I'm trying to say is that when you live in a culture with sexual restraint, women make smarter choices about the men that they partner up with. They select better. And now let's talk about the final reason, the feminization of culture. This is relevant because female sexual liberation goes hand in hand with women's political and cultural emancipation. Women standing up to take their share of cultural influence. And this is all very understandable. The intentions are noble. All humans are equal. We all deserve dignity. But despite the best intentions, we have not properly grappled with the fact that this has unintended consequences. Women having greater influence over the culture is going to shift that culture as it better reflects female psychology. So what do we know about the way that women think? Well, we know that they favor social harmony. That's a big priority for women. They want everybody to feel good. And if a bit of structural integrity needs to be sacrificed, so be it. Women are also conflict avoidant. Evolution has wired women to be extremely weary of open disagreements and arguments, which is understandable and necessary in many situations, but sometimes there are hard decisions that need to be made. Tough choices necessary for cultural survival, and if the primary focus is making sure that, no conflict breaks out, then important issues like truth and discernment, they get left by the wayside. The research on women in juries backs this up, demonstrating that in the female mind, there is a greater focus on compassion as opposed to the application of justice. And it has its place. It makes sense why women have this. When you're raising babies and toddlers and little ones, a compassionate approach is often far more appropriate than lecturing 4-year-olds about the black and white, right and wrong. But should that energy and those priorities be guiding the ship, actually steering where we're heading as a culture? The final one, emotions, I want to demonstrate by using this graph, which I found on the blog post, and it's fascinating. So what you're seeing on the bottom, that's time. It sort of starts around 1950. And on this axis, the vertical one, you've got different languages. But what it's demonstrating is fluctuations in frequency of certain types of words appearing in books and in media. So in this first column, you've got language about the principal component, a lot of me and I statements. The next column measures the amount of sentiment in language. The third column is about intuition-related words, to do with like subjective emotion. And the fourth column measures the frequency of rationality-related language. Now, look at the timelines, because you see where there's a huge change is just after the female sexual liberation movement. Then suddenly there's a huge spike in language about the principal component, about emotions, about sentimentality. And in this final column, there's a huge decrease in the language that expresses rationality. Now, let me be absolutely clear. I love femininity. At its best, it's what makes life wonderful. The kindness, the beauty, all of it. It doesn't just have a place, it is essential. But does femininity build lasting civilizations? You guys know me. I hate the idea that men and women are the same, that there's no differences between the genders. No, masculinity and femininity are different, but they both have something vital to contribute. And it's when men and women work together, both contributing their unique strengths, that we all thrive. And do you see that advocating for a culture with sexual restraint is not being mean to women? This is good for women. It means that when they come time to choose a man, they're going to be choosing from a pool of men who think in the long term, who are reliable, who are providers, who think about retirement. And it means the society of which she's a part of is on an upwards trajectory as men are building and creating. But if women's sexual expression is just unrestrained, then those characteristics in men are just going to disappear, because they recognize that that's no longer the winning strategy. That's not what's going to get them to partner up with a woman. They're going to start to emphasize more short-term traits. And then they have casual sex, which is just meaningless. But none of these women actually want to have children with these men because they sense that they're unreliable. And so fertility rates drop and the birth rate just bottoms out. This is what has happened in the West. And we're not really feeling the impact of it yet, because we're still living off the borrowed credibility of decades past with our sort of material abundance. And so there's enough people that want to immigrate to Western countries. Any population growth that Western countries are experiencing is fake. It's not real. We are just borrowing the population of other countries to artificially make it look like we're still growing. The birth rates amongst the native population is below replacement level. It's in decline. We're not thinking long term. We don't believe in a future. This might have been one of the most interesting graphs that I found on that blog, because what he is demonstrating has been the huge increase recently in media reboots and sequels and franchises. Like there's less creative risk taking. The author of the blog is making the case that when a culture is in decline, it has nothing to look forward to. It's not thinking of new things. And so it looks backwards. It's all about nostalgia and trying to remember back when things are good, as you can see by the kind of media that's being created nowadays. So what is the solution? Well, from my perspective, there are 3 different paths you can take. You can enjoy the decline. You can move to restrict women's sexual freedom, or you can attempt to educate and convince the female population. The question is, which one of these 3 do you choose? I'm going to spend the rest of this video explaining these different options as well as my own personal recommendation. So If after listening to this video, you're curious to explore how you as an individual should respond to and integrate this information, that's what I'm going to cover in the rest of this video. On Patreon, that's where my videos go into a lot more depth. There's a lot more nuance. I make it a bit more personal and practical. What you see here on YouTube, these are just the shortened abridged versions. If you like my videos and you've watched all the way to the end of this one, so I have to imagine that you do, you're going to enjoy the Patreon extended versions. So I recommend you give it a try, come on over, sign up and see if you like it.